Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Impact 100's Equality. Today is Women's Equality Day, and we are very excited to have a girl power panelist and lineup of speakers to talk to us today to learn more about women's equality and to talk about the power of women's vote. I am very excited. Hopefully we can get in there and turn on the Attorney General Dana Nessel's camera to really have an opportunity to speak to one of our female leaders. We live in a state that has an incredible number of women at our top executive levels. And because of that, we have a great opportunity to allow them to hear their perspectives on both the 19th Amendment, as well as how we as women can become more involved and more active. Again, my name is Callie Walsh. I am the president-elect of Impact 100 Metro Detroit, and consider me your cruise director today. I get to ask all the fun questions that many of you submitted already, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat to see if there's any that might be aligned. But good morning, welcome Attorney General Nessel. We are so excited to have you with us today. For those of you that don't know, Attorney General Nessel is our 54th Attorney General. He is from the Metro Detroit area, having a graduate of Michigan State as well as Wayne State, and has done an incredible, really built her career on civil rights, on helping individuals, helping marginalized individuals. So we're really excited to have your perspectives and hear your opinions, Attorney General. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kelly. I love everything you said, except for I'm a proud Michigan graduate, so I'm a Wolverine. That's why the governor and I sometimes go at it a little bit on game day. But
well, I'm sorry.
I'm not going to be offended that you called me a Spartan. I'm just going to correct you.
I apologize. Well, I'm from Columbus, so hopefully that we're not off to a good start yet.
We got a lot more to talk about then, lady. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Well, so, you know, I'd love for us to just kind of dive in. We get you for just a few moments. We're so incredibly proud to have you in this conversation. So I just want to kind of dive in. So today is, again, Women's Equality Day, celebrating when the 19th Amendment was signed into law. And I'm curious what your perspective of the 19th Amendment is, both as an Attorney General and as a woman. And maybe even if, for those of us who it's been a hot minute since we were in civil and, you know, in history class and civics class, your lens of how the Attorney General's office impacts women and what your office is doing with women.
Well, how much time do you got for me?
I know, right? I packed in an hour of conversation.
All right, because we got a lot going on at my office. I just want to say this, though, because I want to start off a little bit talking about how I became Attorney General, sort of famously in some circles, in regard to sort of pushing back at the notion that we couldn't have too many women in office. And that was a big part of my campaign. And as you might know, in the Democratic Party, we don't have primaries for a number of our offices, our down ballot offices. And that includes Attorney General and Secretary of State, and also our Supreme Court races. And so just from the very beginning, for me, when it became very clear to people that Gretchen Whitmer was likely to be our nominee for governor and that Jocelyn Benson was likely to be our nominee for Secretary of State, there was a lot of pressure put on individuals in the Democratic Party who would be voting at the convention not to vote for me, not to support me, only because they thought that the state of Michigan would never, ever elect 3 women to their chief executive offices. And I had to fight back vigorously against that theory, so much so that when the Me Too movement really started to come into being, and day after day after day, we were hearing some really egregious stories of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual misconduct by people at all levels of government, and not just government, you know, whether it was in Hollywood, whether it was in journalism, that I really had to be very strong about saying, you know, maybe we wouldn't have this problem if we had more women at the top levels of government or business or you know, journalism or what have you. And I really had to work hard to get women engaged to come out to support my candidacy, because of this notion that the state would never tolerate this. We would never be okay with that many women in office, which of course was something that was horrifying to me because in 2014, the Democrats had an all-male ticket, and I didn't hear anybody say anything about that. And I had said over and over again that really our best chances of becoming elected is if we had more women that were on the ticket. And lo and behold, we all now have titles as, executive office holders in this state. And they were wrong about that because people were ready to have women as leaders at all levels of government. But that was 2018, that wasn't 100 years ago. That was just a couple years ago that we had to have that fight and prove people wrong that it was okay to have women leaders in this state. So I just want to remind people that sometimes it feels like we've come a long way, and sometimes it feels like we have so far to go. But that's just a little story about me sort of even getting the opportunity to be on people's ballot in the general election in 2018. It was a real fight based solely on that issue. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm kind of curious about that. So we had 300 women register for this, which was absolutely incredible. And I think part of it is we're curious of both having female executives in Michigan, but also how do we get more women to understand their power and either run for office, step up to leadership? And maybe what gave you that nudge, or if you're talking to a woman who's maybe thinking she's trying to find her voice in that type of leadership space, how could someone go about doing that?
Well, first of all, of course, I think it's really important for women to support women. And we now have a lot of women that are elected leaders in our state, both at the state level, obviously, and also at the federal level, and at local levels all around the state. But I think it's important to have programs, which really do exist, where women support other women and help other women. And I had to tell you, I really push back against the old stereotype that somehow women don't get along with each other when they're in positions of leadership. I'm really proud that every week I am working with Secretary Benson and Governor Whitmer and all the women that are members of our congressional delegation in the United States Senate, and then of course in the State House and the State Senate. So, it's just simply not true, but also it's organizing as women. And there are a number of women's political groups that have sprung up, honestly, just since 2016 that never existed before, that were hugely impactful in terms of getting me into office. And they really organized. And, these were folks that I think previously, maybe they were regular voters, but they weren't organizers. And I think many of us who, we're busy, right? Many of us have jobs outside the home. We're raising young children. We got a lot going on, and it feels overwhelming to also have to put aside a chunk of our time in order to become politically active. But I think what we've grown to realize in recent years is this isn't an option for us. If we want to not just advance in terms of the rights that women have and the protections that women have, but just even to keep the rights that we have right now, we have to be properly represented. And of course, famously, as Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you pull up a folding chair. And that's what a lot of women have done lately. And I will say, I know for me, specifically, I never, ever could have, 2018 was the first time I ever ran for political office. Really had never imagined it at all before 2016. But I had gotten so tired of whether it was our state government or whether it was our federal government, I would routinely see a group of exclusively men, and usually they were, pretty monolithic, white, older men that would be around a table discussing women's issues or issues that were particularly of great salience or interest to women, you know, and whether that was healthcare or childcare issues, whether it had to do with reproductive rights, I would see exclusively men talking about issues that I think had the greatest impact sometimes on women. And I would always say, like, where the heck are all the women to chime in on this? If we don't have a woman's perspective on this, you know, how are you ever going to create good legislation? And it was just a matter of knowing that we had to get more female voices in the room to be part of those discussions and part of those policy making decisions. But I will say, I mean, the new organizations that came into being just in the last 4 years, I mean, so many women that will tell you, I was never involved before in my life. Yes, maybe every couple of years I went to the polls and I voted, but that was it for me. And now that's how I spend much of my free time as a political organizer, getting people to understand those who are running for office and be educated about those people and maybe host events where those people speak, and then ensuring that people get out and actually vote.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, you know, it's interesting. Personally, that completely resonates with me. I would never say I was a political organizer, but in the past several years, I've always voted, but now I'm really understanding that my civic responsibility is not only to vote, but to ensure that others have accessible and have the rights to vote and that they're not being suppressed in their vote. And if we can take a moment, you mentioned representation, and we know representation matters. And I'm curious how, being a female and attorney general, and I looked in the history of Michigan, and we've had very few attorney generals that were female.
I'm the second.
I would say second, right? Just Governor Granholm was the others. How do you think that you bring a different lens, and what has your office tackled even just in the past 2 years that maybe hadn't been thought of or looked at in the past?
Okay, well, firstly, I think it's important, you know, just as I said that in government in general, we need to have better representation. I felt like just in my office, my department, it was important to have more women in leadership positions. And I have to say, I was a bit startled and taken aback during the transition from General Schuette's administration to mine, when I first got to know really everyone in the office and who held what position and so forth. I was sort of shocked to see that when I came in, I think there were 26 divisions in my office, and there were just a handful of women that were division chiefs out of all the division chiefs. And again, it was almost all almost all men, and entirely with one exception, white men, who held those positions. And that was so strange to me because I was used to practicing in a field where we know that more women graduate from law school than men. So how you end up with so many women who were in positions of authority in the office was very startling to me. And I will say that my last experience of government was working for Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy, and I can assure you that was not the case in her office. So, you know, it was a matter of course, respecting the great work of the men that were in those positions, but making certain that women who earned it and who deserved it had an opportunity to compete for those positions. And I brought in many, many more division chiefs that are female in the office now. And that in addition to that, my Solicitor General, who's the top appellate attorney in the States, is a woman. She's actually the first Muslim woman in the United States ever to hold that position. Actually the majority of my executive staff, my director of communications, my chief of operations, a number of other top positions in my office are women. And so I think there is frankly better collaboration now that things are a little bit more equal just in the office and the way it's run. And I think it's a different perspective on the way it's run too. But in addition to that, it's the cases that we are bringing, and in some instances, the cases that we are not bringing. So, you know, I'm a big proponent of reproductive freedom. I ran on that. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. And so one of the things I did was to leave cases that had been joined by my predecessor that were antithetical to reproductive rights, but join on to a number of different cases that involved things like, contraception rights, abortion rights, and we have just case after case after case that we joined onto involving the ability for women to maintain the rights that they currently have in the United States that I think are eroding. A lot of these cases also had to do with things like equal pay, and even in supporting the ACA, the fact that we now have the ability to have free, OBGYN, annuals and things of that nature that were never the case before. And the fight to ensure that birth control is covered, which is something that was not true before the ACA, and that you insurance companies that refuse to allow for that to be covered, even though there are so many people, obviously, that not just use that as a method of birth control, but of course, birth control is prescribed for a litany of different reasons, those medications that deal with reproductive health, and that, these are lawsuits seeking to ensure that insurance companies don't cover that. But in addition, I've been a big proponent of ensuring that we once again ensure that the Violence Against Women Act, VOCA, is reauthorized. Which I'm going to be honest, I'm horrified that currently we don't have a majority in both chambers of Congress that think it's important to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. It's been quite some time that we recognize, how devastating domestic violence is all across the nation. And, all of these measures were put in place to enhance the ability to investigate and to prosecute and to provide services for women who had been the victims of domestic violence. I can't even believe that this is an act that has been allowed to lapse. And I'm quite horrified, and I don't understand why this is a partisan issue. I just don't. Protecting women from being subjected to domestic violence should be something that everyone, irrespective of their party, supports. I will say in July, I filed an amicus brief in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia in a case involving the Equal Rights Amendment, and that brief, supports the ratification of the ERA as the 28th Amendment, declaring, once and for all, the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. I can't believe it's 2020 and we are still arguing about this issue. So these are a number of examples of things that I've done in the office. I can really I could go on because the list goes on for a very long time, but it's very, very crucial to me that at all times women are protected under the law, and that there is equal protection for everyone, irrespective of sex or gender.
Amen. Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left before we need to move on to our next speaker. And what I'm most interested in is on today, the 100th anniversary. What is a piece of wisdom or a point of action that you would recommend to all of the women on this call as we go on to our day?
Well, honestly, the most important thing that I can say is, and again, this is irrespective of whatever your partisan leanings are, again, just becoming involved, and if that means nothing more than voting, ensuring that each and every election cycle, you make an effort to become aware of who the candidates are that are on the ballot, or the proposals that are on there, if there are ballot proposals. Become educated, take the time. It's so easy with the internet now too, right? To become educated on that and to make sure you vote and to encourage other people to do the same. But also, especially for 2020, to make certain that you understand how to properly vote. Unfortunately, there's so much misinformation out there, and of course I'm grateful to have Secretary Benson, who I know elaborate on this and explain this further. But, but we're working together right now on projects to ensure that there is proper education. This is the first time in Michigan history that we have no reason absentee voting in this state, and it could not come at a more important